Well, let's go down to the UK. A little bit of good news. Joining me, Tim Smith, former Victorian State Liberal MP, of course, now living and studying in London. Tim, great to have you on the program. This is absolutely squarely and beautifully in your bailiwick because, I know you've campaigned on, as a lot of good men have, on the rights of women to single-sex spaces and all of that, but it's also a rowing issue, and you used to row for Australia. We've got some very good news for women from the British Rowing Association regarding transgender athletes. What can you tell us?
Well, good evening, Peter, and great to be speaking with you. Well, great news. British Rowing has banned men competing against women. And the fact that this is even being spoken about as if it's in some way, shape or form controversial just shows you how absurd this whole debate around so-called trans rights has become. Of course, biological men cannot compete against women in any sport, but particularly sports like rowing, which is so dependent on height, strength and weight. For example, the world record for men on the rowing machine is 5 minutes and 35 seconds. For women, it's 6 minutes and 21 seconds. Now, I was a lightweight rower very many years ago, which means that I had to weigh 70 kilos when I was competing. Of course, I'm 175 centimetres tall. I can't compete against 6'8", 100 kilo athletes. So rowing has special and separate categories for both adaptive rowers and lightweight rowers. So finally, British Rowing has said, no. Anyone born biologically male is banned from rowing in women's competitions. So my question is this: why won't Rowing Australia do the same thing? Why won't World Rowing do the same thing? And why won't the IOC finally come out and say, no blokes in women's sport, that's it, no questions asked?
It feels, though, out of the UK, and we've seen decisions in the UK across other sporting associations like cycling, you are further advanced over there in this whole debate. You know, you've gone through Tavistock, the government inquiry, shutting down child gender treatments, thinking that the science is just not there to potentially ruin the lives of young people. That's been pulled back. This decision by Rowing's been pulled back. You've got Keir Starmer, the Labor leader. Even he has now come out and said a woman's an adult female. Well, hello, that's biology 101. But before he refused to answer that question. So it feels like the worm's turning over there. Yet we feel here in Australia, I mean, we couldn't even get an inquiry up in the Senate this week into are we doing the right thing in these clinics in Australia regarding young people, the same clinics over there that you've closed down.
Well, Peter, for those so-called Conservatives that voted against Pauline Hanson's motion in the Senate this week, all I can say is I hope you face some serious questions at your pre-selections over the next year before the next federal election. So I think you're going to, because I think the Australian people, parents in particular, are looking at what's going on in some of these so-called gender dysphoria clinics and looking at the British example. Now, I would advise all of your viewers tonight to read Hannah Barnes's book. Hannah Barnes's book, Time to Think, which is an extraordinary expose on the Tavistock Clinic. It has so many accounts from clinicians and former patients who profoundly regret everything that they did at that clinic, that has seen thousands of kids altered forever. And many of those now adults regret what happened to them, their bodies being mutilated in such a fashion. And, you know, they were children when they made this decision. And these adults, these doctors went along with it. And a lot of these doctors now regret it. Now, we're doing this still in Australia. And I think it's going to be like the East German doping scandal one day. I really do. It's going to create class actions. It's going to create a situation where people will be very, very angry that they were allowed to do to their bodies what they did as children with seemingly compliant doctors and health departments. So whoever those Liberals were that voted against Pauline Hanson's motion in the Senate this week, they ought to hang their heads in shame because this is a massive issue. The Brits are miles ahead of Australia on this, and they need to look at what's happening over here, where the Tavistock Clinic will be closed down next year.
And spot on, Tim. But I also say, if you think Hanson's wrong, If you think the doctors speaking out are wrong, well, have the inquiry. You know, sunlight's a good disinfectant. Have the inquiry and prove her wrong.
Yeah.
But shutting down the inquiry tells me
right.
there's a lot of truth. There's a lot of truth in this. Hey, I picked up this story this afternoon. I thought I've got to bring this to my viewers tonight. A news site over there, a leading news site, iNews, well, they have been forced to apologise for claiming that the pro-women's protest in Melbourne, the Let Women Speak rally, this is the one, of course, that Moira Deeming fronted, the campaigner Kelly J. Keane attended in Melbourne. There was a claim over there on this news site that that rally had staged a mass Nazi salute. They've now called it, as you know, back then, an anti-trans rally. Well, it wasn't. It was a pro-women's rally. There's been this apology. J.K. Rowling, well, she tweeted out on this, as she's made sure everybody has seen this apology from the news site. What's your response?
Well, I think there are some people in Melbourne who ought to read this statement from iNews and reflect upon it, because it makes it very clear that iNews now accepts that that these Nazi nutters were not invited by those people that were organising a pro-women's space rally. It was not an anti-trans rally, as you said. It's a pro-women's rally. The Nazis gate-crashed it. The iNews knows it. I suspect some people within the Victorian Parliamentary Liberal Party might want to read that.
Well, you're being very diplomatic. We'll leave it there. We all know that code. Have a good weekend, Tim. We'll see you